Today's program of Cape Cod Arts with John Murrell is being presented by the Voice Studio of John Murrell, voice training for the serious student, located at 449 Route 6A in historic East Sandwich. For information, please call Mr. Murrell at 774-313-9012. The Voice Studio of John Murrell. Thank you for tuning in to Cape Cod Arts with John Murrell. This program is a look at the vibrant art scene on Cape Cod, from Falmouth, Bourne, and Sandwich, all the way down to Truro, Wellfleet, and Provincetown. Today's guest will be Deborah Foreman, who's written a magnificent series of books called Perspective on the Provincetown Art Scene. I will be reviewing the recent Mozart Festival presented by the Cape Cod Symphony Orchestra. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. And finally, I want to tell you about my recent program, In a Sentimental Mood. John Murrell sings the songs of Duke Ellington. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy today's program. Earlier in November, I was able to see the Mozart Festival presented by the Cape Cod Symphony Orchestra at the Barnstable High School Auditorium. It was all Mozart, for the most part, and it was a very, very enjoyable program. The first half included the overture to Mozart's opera seria, La Clemenza di Tito, which was a nice quick little movement that opened this concert. The featured work for the first half featured the international clarinetist David Schifrin. He performed the concerto for clarinet and orchestra in A major. It was simply wonderful. The end of the performance, there was a unanimous standing ovation, and that was followed by an intermission. At the beginning of the second half, the maestro, Jung Ho Pak, decided to gift us with the Dvorak Slavonic Dance No. 10. He explained to us that Dvorak lived and wrote in Prague, and that's where Mozart lived. So he wanted to sort of give us a little Prague. The featured work of the second half was the Prague Symphony, and it was spectacular. What was memorable was the final movement that had this taut, firm, aggressive movement, and everyone played. It was like it felt like it was riding a steed through the forest. It was really delightful. I have to say, I was dreading this last thing, which was like a happy birthday tribute. I was like, ugh, you know, as we know, the symphony is celebrating their 50th anniversary, and they're doing various happy birthday tributes at all their concerts. And I was like, well, what is this? It turned out to be delightful. It was happy birthday as if Johannes Brahms composed it, or Mozart, or Beethoven, or Bach. It was really lovely. Now, I have to say, I'm not a fan of the Barnstable High School Auditorium, especially because of the acoustics. But often when I'm asked to review a concert with the Cape Cod Times, I sit like in the 10th row. This time I sat in the second to last row, sort of in the balcony. The sound was really good. It was good. Very, very good. So I guess, like with all halls, it depends where you sit. And finally, there's been a little brouhaha about audience members applauding between sections of the symphony or the concerti. Some people believe, like I was trained, that you applaud at the beginning of a performance and at the end, and there should be space in between the movements. However, traditions come and go in music. In the old days, whenever that was, people did applaud in between each movements. So we're kind of at the edge of a new tradition. The Cape Cod Symphony has two series. It has its pop series and its classic series. During the holidays, they will be celebrating their Pops concert all Christmas, featuring choruses, and that's practically sold out. So if you're interested, you should definitely get your tickets immediately. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my concert, which was performed on Sunday afternoon, November 13th at 3 p.m. at the West Falmouth Library. The program was called, or is called, In a Sentimental Mood. John Murrell sings the songs of Duke Ellington. The program was sold out, and I did receive a standing ovation at the end, so I think it was successful. I felt very good about it, and what a lot of my audience members told me is they really enjoyed the input of our last guest, Mick Carlin, the author of Riding the Duke's Train. He gave a pre-concert lecture, and then throughout the concert would come up and give little tidbits about the program. I'm hoping to repeat the program at least once or twice on the Cape, upper and lower. So look for it. Thank you. So now that it's the off-season, the tourists are gone, a lot of places are closed down, I recommend going down to Provincetown this time of year. It's very interesting to see it without the tourists, and it's very easy to find a parking spot. While you're there, continue our theme for today of the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. It's open Thursday through Sunday, limited hours, but what a better way to see a museum when there's very few guests. I highly recommend the Hawthorne Gallery, which has some of the great works from the artist colony from the last century. There are 5 beautiful galleries. It's airy and roomy, and I definitely recommend taking a drive down to Provincetown on a sunny day. Debbie Foreman's Perspectives on the Provincetown Art Colony, A History of the Art Colony, was published this year in June by Schiffer Publishing. Debbie Foreman was the features editor of the Cape Cod Times and editor-in-chief of Cape Cod View magazine. She wrote the script, conducted the interviews, and worked on the filming for Art in Its Soul, an award-winning documentary on the history of the Provincetown Art Colony, which was aired on Boston's public television station WGBH and subsequently on public television stations nationwide. She has a degree in journalism from Temple University in Philadelphia and has studied art at the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts and at the Philadelphia Museum School of Art. Debbie, I'm so glad you're here. We first started working together when you were the features editor at the Cape Cod Times, and you asked me to write some reviews for the Cape Cod Times, which was fun, and I've always followed you. And I sort of forgot about what you'd been doing. We ran into each other occasionally at restaurants, but I read your delicious article on Degas in the Cape Cod Times about the exhibit at the MFA, and I went, huh, what's Debbie up to? And boy, did we find out what you were up to. Wow. You wrote, we call it a 2-volume set, is that what I would call it?
Yes, it's a 2-volume book, right.
And I hear it's like 9.5 pounds or something?
Yes, with the box it weighs, I think, 9.2 pounds.
Oh, it's amazing. Now, the book is called Perspective on the Provincetown Art Colony. Yes. And it all started back in 1899 with an artist, teacher, Charles Hawthorne. My question is, I probably can guess, but you tell me, what was it about, or what is it about Provincetown that has attracted and does attract artists?
Well, first of all, it's the light. It is absolutely fabulous. It is, Robert Motherwell said, who was there for many years, he said it was the kind of light you see on the Greek islands. So, first of all, I think what Charles Hawthorne was attracted to was the light. But as things moved along, other artists were attracted. As artists came to study with Hawthorne when he opened up his Cape Cod School of Art in 1899, as artists came to study with him, artists drew more artists, the artists drew writers, and at one point around 1916 there were 6 schools functioning during the summer season in Provincetown. So more artists came, and the artists attracted other artists. It was also inexpensive to live there in those days, which is not the case today. Right. It was very inexpensive. So I mean, you could have rented a cottage, a studio and a cottage for $50 for the season. So it was really inexpensive. You could have room and board for $10 or $12 a week in these little, you know, what we would call B&Bs today. So it was cheap, and also it was very welcoming because there was a large Portuguese population that were very accepting and very open, and they'd, you know, if the artist didn't have a meal for the day, they could go down to the pier, and the fishermen would give them fish free. So there was all of this coming together, and that is what started the art colony. And more or less, I mean, there are some changes obviously, but you know, it's not nearly, well, it's pretty expensive to live there today.
I think I'm an old soul, and when I looked at your photographs from the turn of the century, how quaint and charming it was. And then when I go there in the summer and I just see the hordes of people. But I guess because of that movement. So what is it about Hawthorne that people wanted to work with him? Well,
he was and he taught in an impressionistic way, not French Impressionism, but kind of bringing a new idea. He had been to Paris, he had seen the Impressionists, and later on the Post-Impressionists. So he was bringing some of the European modernism, and American art at the time was pretty traditional.
Okay.
So he was, and he taught about, don't draw, he said, create form with one spot of color against another. And he was pretty well known. He had worked with William Merritt Chase on Long Island. He had assisted him in Chase's school. And when Chase closed his school, that's when Hawthorne was looking to have his own school, and he found Provincetown, and it was perfect for him.
Wow. You know, back to your book for just a moment, or as long as we want. It's huge. It's 2 volumes. It's huge. And it just came out in June, right?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
But how long did it take to put something this together? Now, I know you've been writing articles about articles about artists. Who was your first artist that you interviewed?
Well, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It was Robert Motherwell, and he was, at that point, 1979, I just started at the Cape Cod Times. He was the giant in the art colony at the time. All of the abstract expressionists had been there in the late 40s and the 50s, but Motherwell had come in the mid-50s, I think, and stayed and died, actually, in Provincetown. So I found out, I was new to the Cape, relatively new to the Cape, new to the paper, fearless in some ways. And
You came from Philadelphia, right?
Yes, right.
From Temple University. Were you right out of college?
No, I had worked, I'd been in New Jersey and done some, I was a journalism major in college and had worked at some newspapers in New Jersey, and then we came here. And so in 1979, I had just started the paper. I called the director of Long Point Gallery, which was where Motherwell was exhibiting, and asked if I could get an interview. And the director said, well, let me, I'll call you back. And a day or so later, she called me back, and she said, you're all set. It was hot August day. I'll never forget it. And I arrived. Motherwell, the house is still in the family, right on Commercial Street in the East End, right on the water. And to this day, I really believe that he thought I was the New York Times and not the Cape Cod Times.
Oh, yes.
I don't know I don't know for a fact that that's the case, but...
Was he hard to get interviews with? Is that
well,
the general
apparently, because soon after the article appeared in the Cape Cod Times, I had a call from an editor at Boston Magazine, and he said, we've been trying to get an interview with Motherwell for years, and could you do one for us? So apparently he was difficult, and whether I just stumbled into it or he really did mistake me for the New York Times, I don't know. But he was very gracious, brilliant, articulate. It was a fabulous interview. And after Boston Magazine called me, I called him, And he was back in Greenwich, Connecticut, where he spent most of the year, and he said, sure. And I spent a whole day with him in Greenwich and did a piece for Boston Magazine. And so beginning in '79, you asked me how long it took. Beginning in 1979, I fell in love with the art colony. And I started focusing on interviewing artists in the art colony. And at 2009, that was like 30 years, there was no book that really captured the history of the art colony. There had been a book in 1976, small book, paperback book, related to an exhibition at the Syracuse University. And that was all. There was no book that really captured the whole art colony.
So you didn't have reference books to go to when you
Not a lot. I had that one book, and then, but through the years, as I was researching the artists in order to do an interview, I had put together an enormous amount of material. So I decided that I was going to write this book, that someone needed to write it, and I had all this material. And it only took me 9 months to write.
Oh, okay.
But I wasn't starting from scratch.
Sure.
I had all this material, all the interviews, everything that I had done. I had this enormous body of work. Plus, I had done a lot of research. Of course, I couldn't go back in time. I wasn't, I couldn't go back to 1899. But I had done a film, written and did all the interviews for a documentary film that was on GBH and PBS in the mid-'80s. And I had found a woman who had studied with Charles Hawthorne in 1926.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to go back to Hawthorne through this woman.
Okay.
And what I tried to do as I was interviewing the artists was go back in their experience. And I found artists who had been there in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, so they could talk about, what it was like then. So although I couldn't go all the way back, personally, I was able to go back through other artists.
Sure, sure. What I love about your book is I love art, and I'm sort of becoming more and more excited about visual arts, but I don't know that much. I'm trained as a musician. I know music. And I thought, well, I'll just enjoy looking at your book and all the pictures. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. And it's very readable, and it's the way I like to do my concerts. It's not pandering, but I don't have to have pre-information to enjoy it. And I think and it's very well written, but you've written for a long time. So it's really, really good. Now, is there anything, when you put this together in those 9 months, in the years before, was there anything that you went, wow, I didn't know that? Were there any things that you discovered putting this together?
Oh, a lot of things that I discovered. I think I discovered the art colony because when I came here, because so little had been written about it, I wasn't even aware that there was an art colony in Provincetown. I knew Provincetown the way a lot of people know Provincetown. It's a fun place to go. It's, you feel like you're in a little kind of oasis on the Cape, very funky and neat. But I didn't know. So I discovered the art colony, number one, and realized the richness of the art colony. And as I began to do my research related to the artists that I was interviewing, it evolved my appreciation of what had occurred there. And what I say in the book is that when you realize all the artists who were there, you can see Provincetown as a microcosm of 20th century American art, and that's really significant. And what is even more significant is Motherwell representing all of the first generation of abstract expressionists, Pollock, Klein, Rothko, de Kooning, that whole generation who were responsible for, and it happened during World War II, who were responsible for bringing the art center of the world, which had been Paris, but Paris was occupied. It was World War II, the Nazis were there. A lot of artists and writers came to the United States. So they kind of mixed with these American artists, and abstract expressionism burst on the scene in the 40s, and that brought ultimately the art center of the world from Paris to the United States. And
for sure, you really believe that?
oh, I know it. And I mean, I've read. I mean, I'm not just saying this. This is
really,
you know,
and because of the
because of the war,
yeah.
Because Paris was occupied by the Nazis, a lot of artists had to leave. You know, Picasso stayed, but a lot of artists left, and there was this excitement of them coming to the United States, mixing in, bringing all of the European modernism that they had experienced with Cubism and Fauvism, you know, Picasso, Matisse,
sure.
bringing it, and the Surrealists, and coming together with this exciting time, and it caught fire with the American artists. And because Paris was kind of, you know, in the midst of a war,
sure.
the center moved to New York. And it's really retained its dominance. Why Provincetown is so important is because that group of artists, the abstract expressionists, which were responsible for bringing the art center from Paris to New York, were in Provincetown.
Oh.
So that's and that fed on, you know, the artists fed, and they came and the place nurtured these artists, and after them, all these other artists came. I mean, you know, there were Red Brooms was there, and a lot of the pop artists were there, and every movement could be represented in Provincetown.
Wow, wow. So just sort of like composer Charles Ives sort of borrowed from everybody. It was really the American experience.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
It wasn't
really
the Parisian experience. It was, it drew, like what our country does. It draws on everything.
Right. Exactly. And what was very important was the influence of Hans Hofmann.
Okay.
He was in Germany. I mean, he was German, and he had gone to Paris prior to. He was born in like 1880. Gone to Paris prior to World War I, had seen this modernism erupting in Paris.
Okay.
With Cubism and Fauvism and all that was. He was in Paris, got to know all these artists, assimilated a lot of this, what was going on. He happened to go back to Germany right before World War I and couldn't return because he was a German national. He
right.
couldn't go back to Paris, so he stayed. He opened up a school in Munich, and in 1930, one of his students, one of his American students who was at UC Berkeley, invited Hofmann to come and teach there.
Okay.
So Hofmann left Germany in 1930 and taught there. And then at one point he decided to come east to New York. At that point, 1933, Hitler was in power. His wife was still in Germany.
Okay.
She didn't get to the United States until 1939, and she was saying, don't come back. You know, Hofmann wasn't Jewish, however, his art would have been considered degenerate art,
right.
because it was you know, abstract and not exactly, wouldn't quite fit the model of Nazi
sure.
art. So he stayed here, became an American citizen, opened up a school in New York in 1935, and then also a school, summer school in Provincetown. And he was there from teaching from 1935 to 1958. So during those years, he brought thousands of artists to Provincetown
wow.
to study with him. Many of them studied with him in New York, but then they also studied with him in Provincetown. And he was really a force. Probably most people would consider him the most important teacher, modernist teacher in the 20th century. He had that much influence
on our Cape Cod. On our
yes,
wow.
and he was right here, and he brought that. I mean, Chaim Gross, who was a representational artist, said to me, sculptor, he's in the book, said to me, every second artist that you name, well-known artists, studied with Hans Hofmann.
Oh.
So that's the kind of influence. And he brought European modernism to the United States. And he was part of this whole mix with abstract expressionism as well.
Terrific. We've only got a few minutes, and I wanted to ask you a question that would help me and maybe some of the viewers. So I like art, and I don't really know that much. How would you suggest I go to a gallery, for instance, the Provincetown Art Association Museum, and what would I do? I walk in the door. How would I get turned on by art like you are?
Well,
besides buying your book.
Okay. Well, I mean, art is very subjective.
Yes.
So, and it's visual, obviously, and I think you just go and you look, and it's what touches you. The more you know about art, the more you read about art, the greater appreciation you're going to have of art. But ultimately, it's, you know, what strikes you. And you may not see what, you know, abstract art may not appeal to a lot of people. You know, Motherwell said a lot in those early days of abstract expressionism, a lot of people thought monkeys were doing these paintings. So it's not, you have to kind of educate yourself if you want to get into certain kinds of art that don't touch you immediately.
Right.
Some art is going to, you know, it's beautiful. It's a landscape, it's a beautiful still life, it's beautiful. You're going to be touched by it. Other art is a little more difficult, like music, the same thing about music. And the more you know about music, the more you're able to appreciate it.
Do you ever sit in a photograph, at a painting and go, I know something's going on here, and I don't quite get it. And I'm going to stay here till I get it?
Well, sometimes, yes. I mean, sometimes I say I don't get it, and I'm never going to get it.
Right. Or I get it and I don't like it.
Exactly.
But that's okay.
Exactly. Absolutely.
But there's so many different kinds of art.
Yes. And I think that's what we see in Provincetown. The expanse and art and the various movements that we saw in America in the 20th century. And how it evolved, and even the covers of the book show you the evolution of from very traditional art through, you know, through more the abstract, and then there was a whole figurative trend, and now things are anything kind of goes. So, but you see that evolution.
Do you ever teach? Could you ever teach a course at the community college or something?
I've taught at the Cape Cod Museum of Art. I just finished a course on the art colony. Yes. I've taught that I think 3 times. Not at the college. I'm not a teacher. I'm a journalist.
Okay.
And a writer, and now an author. But I'm not a teacher. But I can, you know, teach what I know.
What is in the future now that this has been produced for you? Something else?
I'm working on another book. Schiffer Publishing once wanted me to do a book on Cape Cod contemporary artists, artists working today. What we decided to do, because it's so vast and there's so many artists on the Cape, and they have done these regional books on artists, I kind of proposed that we do a series of 3 books focusing on genre or themes or subject matter, because it would be hard to just do it in one book.
Okay.
So the first book I'm working on is focusing on land and sea, which makes sense because it's Cape Cod, and I'm have done a survey of artists on the Cape who I'd like to include that will give you a spectrum of the kind of art that artists are doing on the Cape that relate to land and sea, from sculpture to photography to painting to printmaking. So there'll be, but it'll be a very broad spectrum of the kind of art. From some of the art will approach abstraction, but there's an influence of land and sea. The sculpture will be the same thing. So I'm trying to put that together, and that's what I'm working on now.
And they're living artists today?
Living artists, yes.
Debbie, this is great. I have to tell you, what we call the production value is so high, and we hear how, you know, book companies are struggling now, but boy, it's like it's the ultimate coffee table book.
Well, I give Schiffer Publishing credit for that. I mean, I put it all together. I selected the art. I wrote the text, but they produced the book. And they were the ones that we were able to produce, you know, the quality of color. And I think they did a really terrific job. And I give them all the credit. And actually, I have had no artists have said to me they were delighted with the reproductions.
Great.
So that's really good.
I wish you all the best of luck with
Well, thank you.
the success of this book and your next books. And I'm going to look for your next class. I want to thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you, John. It was lovely to be here. Thank you. I enjoyed it.